We find out that Peggy is off to Alabama and that the Duke of Buckingham is on his way. The Pittsburgh employees of George Russell will probably experience something dramatic, but for the most part, individuals just stand or sit and talk in rooms. Make everyone watch tennis in Newport again. Alright, so there is a major scene this week, and I'm excited to discuss it because I love soap operas. Naturally, I'm referring about the naked woman in George's bed, whom he forgot to mention. You can try to imagine yourself in the shoes of a robber baron from the 1880s, who prioritized his family over his own ideals. But can you ever really relate to that if you don't have the finest hat collection to support it? George made an error. At her opera tea, Bertha finds out about this. Miss Turner, who is now the sophisticated Mrs. Winterton, basically remarks, "Oh, George never told you about us." And there she is, Bertha, wearing a frock whose trim seemed to have been fashioned by Fraulein Maria from some old lampshades she happened to find. When Bertha visits George in his office, she asks him what transpired with Turner, and his response is like pulling teeth. At last, he claims that Turner entered his room, undressed, and went to bed. Upon realizing it was Turner and not Bertha, he gave the order for her to leave. Because he understood that Bertha depended on her, George refrained from telling Bertha. Oh my. Bertha is definitely very angry. After essentially saying, "I'm sorry you feel you deserve an apology," Bertha accuses George of betraying her and leaves. Together, you are socially ascending robber barons. Since you have been together from the beginning, one partner does not get to play the paternalistic card in this Gilded Age of New York union. Subsequently, it seems that later on the same day, George visits Bertha in her room for assistance with the Pittsburgh Union representative luncheon. Upon discovering that she is still upset with him, he remarks, "You're being jejune." Who else uses the word, you know? And don't tell me that was a lot more frequent back then, because I did some research and the short answer is kind of. It's surprising Bertha didn't give him a straight punch to the beard. Following the meal with Mr. Henderson, the union leader, George becomes agitated since Henderson did not promptly reply to George's offer of how about some money. He thanks Bertha, who informs him that she would be having dinner in her room that night. George comments, "It feels like a death sentence," in response to her essentially saying, "I don't know because you did a terrible thing and emotions aren't always predictable." He asks how long it will be like this. "Good Lord, it feels like only half a day has passed." "Do you mean this? An execution warrant?" When I imagine George taking the marshmallow test as a child, he asks, "Does this test last my whole life? After 5 minutes, will this room be my deathbed?" At last, he acknowledges his error, but it's obvious that he doesn't truly believe what he did was wrong. Next week, this needs to be rectified. Given that George is acting like a turd, how are they going to make out in the greenhouse? What about the misguided Oscar Wilde cameo, though? First of all, it's hilarious that this show opted to parody poor acting, but it seems like Wilde's play wasn't that good. See, before they compose the monologues, casting directors will hear thousands of times over the course of decades. Each person gets one awful play. Having said that, you should read the discussion between Vera and the Tsar in Act 4. Some of its treasures are, "I would have been a patriot for the love of the people. For your love, I have betrayed you. Together, let's venture forth and live among the regular folks." It's always a risk when a historical character is chosen for a period drama. It turns out, before you Google it, that Wilde did not speak with an Irish accent at this time. That's okay, but highlighting historical figures just seems. It often appears like the author is trying to draw your attention by saying, "Look, a person you've heard of." This Oscar Wilde is not enjoyable. Even if it can be done effectively, Clara Barton's previous season was enjoyable. His primary point is that he notices that John Adams is gay. Do you understand? Since Oscar Wilde was a gay man. Furthermore, 3 years after this, so take that with a grain of salt, Wilde didn't even have intercourse with a man, according to Wikipedia. Give up treating him like the stereotypical gay man that he is when all he was doing was writing dull Russian plays and droning on about aesthetics. As previously stated, Peggy is moving to Alabama, which her mother finds worrisome. But Peggy is excited about her upcoming reporting assignment regarding the Tuskegee Institute. She goes into great detail about Tuskegee, as does her editor, Timothy Thomas Fortune, who is also attending. Although he is a historical figure, he is nonetheless permitted to appear as a regular guest. By the way, Fortune mentions that he was a slave in Alabama during his previous residence there. He responds, "I have to move past that somehow." Having never gone to the South, Peggy persuades Fortune to let her go, and when she tells Dorothy, Dorothy is understandably alarmed. It seems natural that she would be quite concerned about her daughter attending a post-Reconstruction former slave state. But I wish they had also included a line about how it's not like the North is that fantastic for black people either. Peggy is still going. Since I think we can all agree that real life is stressful enough, I hope nothing horrible happens. Otherwise, Oscar, Maud, Larry, the widow, Marion, and Dashiell are still having fun. Over clam chowder, Ada and the preacher, aka Robert C. and Leonard, become close, and Bertha tells George they can discuss reconciliation if he can get her the Duke of Buckingham. Adore a piece of action. Hopefully, next week there will be a croquet or ball competition, and someone will get slapped. For her lampshade garment, where did Bertha Russell get her shades? Can we all agree on a time to blacklist the widow who has been having an affair with Larry Russell, so that we don't uncomfortably do it at different times? Oscar Wilde deserves a second opportunity at writing plays, you know. All of this is more of a supportive remark. I know we're supposed to be gossiping, it had to be said. Is it possible to set up a narrative similar to Cinderella with the Duke of Buckingham, since everyone would enjoy that?